Hey, just a quick note before we get started, a little trigger warning. We will be discussing mental health, specifically the topics of depression and suicide. So if this is not comfortable for you, the first probably 20 minutes, we're going to be discussing it. So take care of yourself and approach this however you need. Hey, friends. Welcome to the show. I've got an extra special guest with me today. And I should say that all of my guests are extra special because I choose them really carefully. But today I have someone who had a super big impact on my life, and he has a big impact on lots of people's lives. He is photographer and coach Dave Moss. And I often talk about when I first started working with a coach, and wouldn't you know, this is the guy. This was the first coach that I ever invested in, and it launched my career in a whole new direction. So I am super stoked to welcome Dave Moss to the show today. And as usual, we're just going to dive right in.
Hi.
Hello, Dave.
Hello, Bobby.
Just so you know, you're already being recorded.
I love it. I love it. You said that in the email. I was prepped. I got all my jitters out. We're good.
Beautiful. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Excellent. You have a
Yeah.
slightly different background than I'm used to seeing.
I know. I'm upstairs now. I got myself out of the basement.
Oh, Dave, that was a good call.
Yeah. Both my wife and my therapist said I had to do it. So,
Metaphorically and literally.
yeah. Yeah. So I had to step into the light. They're like, no, this is not good anymore. You got to get out of the basement.
Did you find yourself being drawn to the dark corners?
Oh, always. My whole life. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, if we're tilting and shifting, right? I think I've always been drawn to the dark corners and the quiet places because I never felt like I belonged anywhere else because I constantly felt like I was a burden to everybody in my life, which I discovered over the last year was the root cause of all of my depression and
Yeah.
my suicidal ideation and all that fun stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Would you say that's one of your shifts, Dave?
100%. That's one of my shifts. Yeah, yeah. That's the big one. I mean, yesterday
Yeah.
was the 1 year anniversary of my suicide attempt. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's so wild. And you know what? When I knew that. I didn't know the exact timing, of course, but
yeah,
you had shared at a conference that we were at together last year that had been your recent past.
yeah.
And when I reached out to you to do this interview, I was like, oh wow, interesting timing
Hmm.
that was a year ago. So
Yeah.
what's happened for you in the past year?
Everything. Yeah. So, well, I'll just lean into it. I actually I just got off interviewing somebody for my podcast,
Yeah.
and we were talking about how we were both, as some people call us, oversharers. So I'm just going to
Mhm.
overshare.
Well, you know what?
um,
I want to pause you right there for a second.
sure. Yeah.
I don't believe in oversharing. I think I think oversharing is kind of this term that's used to shame us for
Mm-hmm.
talking about hard things.
Mm-hmm.
And if if us oversharers would find the fortitude to just kind of shake that off, I think the world would realize that we our collective we, not just us overshares, the collective we need to share. This is the problem, is that we're all kind of gatekeeping and guarding and feeling shame for these super challenging things that everybody goes through.
Yeah.
And oversharing kind of comes out of that discomfort of talking about it. People don't want to talk about it, they don't want to acknowledge it, they don't blah blah, on and on and on.
Yeah.
So let's kind of kick that to the curb right here and
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. It
There's no
never
such
felt
thing as
like
oversharing.
oversharing to me. It felt
Yeah.
like the regular amount of sharing. And I was wondering why nobody else did that, you know. And then I started
Yeah.
collecting the people who also were oversharers because I'm just like, oh, we could just have conversations. Like we don't have to dance around the hard things. We just talk
Yeah.
about them.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, the last year was really fucking hard. It
Yeah.
was I am in the best place of my life now because of all of the hardship that I went through between facing my depression, realizing that I'd been carrying that around since I was 13. I didn't live a day of my life from 13 to 42, well, I guess 41 at the time, without a suicidal thought. I thought that was normal.
Mhm.
Then when it all sort of came to a head, and then I started seeing a therapist, and she made me very understand that that is not normal.
Mhm.
Then lots of therapy and EMDR and
Mhm.
other types of therapies like psilocybin and different things like that. I was barely able to work at all last year. I thankfully had the privilege of a savings account and a very supportive wife, but like we stripped most of our savings just so I could get better. You know, that
Yeah.
that was the whole last year of my life. And now I'm on the other side of it. I'm 6 months without a suicidal thought. And yeah, it's
Mhm.
completely different than where I was. My marriage is in a better place. I'm in a better place.
Mhm.
But it was shitty and awful and hard work. And I don't want anybody else to have to go through that, which is why I talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Do you think that while you were going through it, were you able ever to see or have any inclination or what it was going to be like on the other side?
No,
Yeah.
no, I had no idea. I mean, it had been almost my entirety of my life. Like the first 13 years of my life, mostly without it, but I remember very vividly my first suicidal thought. And then that was just it. That was every day. And so that was
Mhm.
just normal.
Yeah.
And so coming out on the other side, it was figuring out who I was as a person all over again. There was no way to see what the other side looked like because I
Yeah.
couldn't even imagine it.
Yeah. And I asked that question because for those people who are in it, um, and it's like that, like when you're in an abusive relationship and when you're in like as a kid and you don't know that what's happening isn't normal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I find them very similar. And again, the only way to know whether or not what's happening in your brain or in your environment is to talk to other people about it, is to be able to have that safety to like be like, hey, my dad says this to me. And people are like, what?
That's not right.
That's not normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, wild.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It, I'm incredibly grateful for it. Like it's one of those things where it was the hardest year of my life, but I wouldn't go back and change it because now that I'm on the other side, I'm like, oh, this is much better. But yeah.
I like it over here.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
were some of the steps that you took?
Uh
Said therapy, but
therapy was number
like,
one. So we already had an amazing couples counselor. Like I believe in therapy. I believe in talking to people, working through things. And we had one for our marriage. Even though our marriage was pretty good, like we just
mhm,
needed an externality to help us through. Like when things got hard, we always like to have somebody else that we could go to help us through that. And so Abby reached out to our therapist and said Dave needs help, and she went, there's a lady in my office will be perfect. And so like I was in a therapist's office within days of everything happening.
mhm,
And then it was just a matter of doing that work. EMDR therapy was a big game
mhm,
changer for me, which I had didn't know anything about at the time. And
mhm.
when they're like, oh yeah, it's like this moving back and forth and this tapping and these paddles, I'm like, that all sounds like hokum. And then it's fucking magic. Sorry, can I swear on here? Because it was
You can swear
magic.
on here,
Okay.
absolutely.
um yeah, that was a big shift. And then I've been interested in um psychedelic assisted therapy for a long time. We actually ended up
Mhm,
we sold our camper van to a pair of therapists who were moving into that, so we talked to them.
mhm,
I listened to podcasts about it. So I talked to my therapist. I'm like, do you think it would be safe for me to do some psilocybin? And like, do you think I'm like mentally stable enough if
mhm,
it throws me off? And she says, yeah, I think you'd be okay for that. And so I did some mushrooms about it, and that was really, really helpful.
mhm.
And then the biggest thing was just having the space to process everything and be in grief and all the rest of that, because I needed that time. Like there were weeks where I didn't do anything but sit in my office and do nothing, or just go walk the dogs, or do
Mhm.
whatever, because I was just incapable. Like it was, with depression, you can't get out of bed. With
Mhm.
healing from depression, you can get out of bed, but you can't function because all of your energy is just being put into rewiring your brain. So I think those were the biggest things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, can you describe EMDR a little bit just for people who
Sure.
might
Yeah.
have
So
heard it?
it's a type of therapy that even my therapist said we don't really know how this works.
Yeah. My
um,
psychologist also said that.
yeah.
She's
So it's,
like, I don't know.
yeah, it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing, but it's basically a way for your brain to rewire itself. So there's a number of different ways you can do it, through tapping or through eye movement. My therapist uses these little like vibrating paddles that I
Yeah.
held in my hand, and the vibration just goes left to right, and you just focus on that, and then you go back and think of specific things. So it's like, my big thing was being a burden. So my therapist asked me the question, go back to the first time you feel like a burden, and then go back further, and like until you uncover the sort of root cause, and then you work your way back out of it. And it was wild, man.
It's so
Like,
wild.
yeah. And like, she very much warned me. She's like, when you do this, have nothing else on your calendar for at least the next day. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'll be fine. And like, I sat in my car and just like bawled for like an hour and a half before I could drive myself home after that session, just like
Yeah.
of the release. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a very powerful thing.
It is phenomenal. I have PTSD around a near-death experience, and it started permeating. I didn't think it was a problem until it became a problem.
Mm. I know that.
Yeah. So I do lots of adventures by myself in the backcountry, and I was having like absolute meltdown panic attacks.
Mm.
Um, and I'm like, this can happen. Like, this is wholly unsafe. But also it was completely threatening like my way of life.
Yeah.
And so I was actually with a friend in October, and what had happened is I was attacked by wasps, and I didn't have medical insurance. I was in the States. And so I didn't want to go to the hospital
Mm.
because that's really expensive, and I had no money. But I had enough wherewithal to be like, I that can't happen. And so the ranger, my husband got me to the ranger station, and the ranger just stood over top of me with an EpiPen, because if the protocol is if he gives me the EpiPen, he would have to call the ambulance.
Yeah.
And I was like, in between like hallucinatory convulsing and stuff, I was like, no, this isn't. I'm gonna make it. And I eventually, after an hour, I don't know what happened to me psychologically, but I went to some weird places, and I came out of it a couple of hours later. And it always just kind of seemed like a cool party trick. Like, hey, I like cheated death just with the power of my mind. Um, but over the years, it chipped away at my um feeling of safety whenever I
Yeah.
was in any type of scenario where I may have been like, where I could possibly, that might happen again.
Yeah.
So in October, I was on a hike with a friend, and I a little thing bit me. Like, I went underneath a tree, and I had a full on like absolutely lost myself. And she's like, Bobby, I think you have PTSD. I was like, what? Like,
No,
no,
not
this is,
me.
I just do this little trick, and I'm fine. But then I went to EMDR, and we went back to the like to that time that it happened, and like reworked it
Hmm.
so that something else happens. Like, what I needed to happen actually happened. And I was like, this is some woo woo shit. And like, I'm fine. Like, I'm much better.
Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah.
much better. It is crazy.
It is insane. It it does not make sense, but it is
Yeah.
it's an insane thing. But like, if I if like some guy with like a long beard and dreads and a tie-dye t-shirt in a back alley somewhere said, "Hey, come do this eye movement thing," I'd be like, "Yeah, it's woo, I get that. This is why you're doing it. We're gonna get high and we're gonna move my eyes." But like a clinical psychologist is like, "Hey, we don't
Yeah.
understand this, but we're gonna do it." I'm just like, sure, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
how do you like, you have run a successful business
I
all through
have.
all through that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the success of last year was varied, but there was there was definitely, I think it was a lot of it was just muscle memory.
Hmm.
Like we've been running businesses for 15 years now.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it just came down to I did the bare minimum to get by. We weren't necessarily flourishing over the last 12 months, but we did okay. And like it also helped that there was two of us. My wife is also an entrepreneur. We run our photography business together, but then she also has a fully separate business, so she could just pour herself into that without needing my support, which was very helpful.
Hmm.
And then I just did the best I could with my coaching business and with the photography business. So
Hmm.
yeah.
I'm what I'm referring more to though is the last 15 years of your life.
Yeah, I mean that was all just, that was a fun journey in and of itself. Like I met Abby, and 3 months later we started our photography business, because we were both kind of sort of shooting separately.
Hmm.
And then we got together, and she hated her job, and her site was getting shut down. So she was a graphic designer for Xerox, but they would like embed them in other companies. So she was embedded into an oil and gas company, and that company was going to go internal, and they were like, "Okay, we'll find you another site," everything else like that. And I said, "No, let's just," I had an engineering job at the time. I'm like, "Let's just try to make a go of this." And so she did that full time for 3 years until we got big enough that I quit my job.
Hmm.
And then that's sort of, yeah, since 2013, March. Apparently a lot happens in March. March of 2013. I quit my job, and that's when we both been full time. So yeah, but
Hmm.
I think the success of that came from, we both realized that our weakness was business.
Hmm.
And so we both got really obsessed with learning about business. Like we took workshops on the photography and
Hmm.
how to be a better photographer and be a better creative. But most of the work we did was like, I took an accounting course because
Hmm.
people were using terms that I didn't understand. And I'm
Hmm.
like, if I'm going to run a business, I should probably know about this. So I took a 3 month like night school accounting course so I could learn the difference between credits and debits and like all of
Yeah.
these things because I didn't know. And
Yeah.
I don't like not knowing.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was a lot of, I think I can hinge a lot of our success on the fact that we both really spend a lot of time learning about the business side of it.
Isn't that funny how successful business owners have learned about business?
I've learned about business. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not the norm in our
Yeah.
industry.
It
Like the
sure
norm,
isn't.
and like I was just at WPPI last week, and I spoke there in 2020. And I taught a class on business, and it was, a quarter capacity in my room. But
Yeah.
I would walk past any room on lighting or any room on posing or any room on editing, and it was like standing room only, max capacity. They're not letting people in anymore. And that's the way it is in our industry. And like, you
Yeah.
need to have the artistry. Absolutely, you need to have
Yeah.
the artistry. But
Yeah.
there are amazing photographers who are broke, and there are shitty photographers who are crushing it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think if there's one thing that people kind of hear from this from this podcast today is one, check in on your mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and two, get some business training, some
Yeah.
absolute business training. Same thing with my like the teaching that I put on. Like I try to like kind of cover it up so that people don't realize that they're learning business.
Yep.
That's the only way to like really magnetize people towards it, is like there's no point in being in this industry if you're not willing to like figure out how much money you want to make and how
Mm-hmm.
much you want to work and what your ROIs are, and like also when we started this, this is where you led me, and I was like, come on. Do you remember? Do you remember when I came to you, Dave?
I do. I do. Yeah.
I
That
shared
was a
that.
fun time.
Where were you in your coaching career when we first started working together?
Pretty early on. Pretty early on. Definitely identity crisis in my coaching journey at that point in time, trying to, because I got into this wanting to be a life coach. That was my whole thing. Like I took a life coaching program. I wanted to
Mhm.
help people with like figuring themselves out. And that
Yeah.
was selfishly because I wanted to figure myself
Yeah. Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
then my business coach said, I think you should do business coaching and trick people into life coaching.
Yeah. Yep.
Because she's like, oh, people will love business coaching. And then I became a business coach and I'm like, people do not love business coaching.
No.
Yeah. But it's I think a lot of people come to me the way that you come to me, where they just something isn't working and they can't quite figure it out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest, like, what are the common themes that you see in your
Okay, so
students?
three things. Number one, they don't value themselves or their own work.
Mm.
From a monetary perspective, where they're like, oh, I can't charge that much for it, I'm not that good, or whatever.
Right.
That's the artist speaking, right? Because the artist is never going to think that they're good enough. I was watching an interview with Emily Blunt about Cillian Murphy the other day, and she was saying he will never believe he's good. Like he'll never watch a movie, even though he just won an Oscar. He'll never watch Oppenheimer and say to himself, "Oh, I was good in that," because that's the
Mhm.
artist. Like we're all like that. Um, but then it poisons the business. You
Yeah.
can't see the value or charge the money. So that's definitely number one. Number two is we are all plagued with limiting beliefs that come from a myriad different places, whether it's childhood or partners or whatever. So working on those types of things is the second one. And then the third one is just people have an allergy to marketing and sales because we have all been sold to and we have all been marketed at, and it gives us the ick, and so we don't want to do that elsewhere. But what we don't understand is this marketing and sales that gave us the ick is bad marketing and sales. We get marketed to and sold to all the time and we don't even notice it, or we embrace it, and that's
Yeah.
the good stuff. And so it's like you have to learn how to do it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you learn those things?
Experimentation, trial and error, like fucking it up a whole lot is the way that I learned it, and that's how I do everything in my life. Like I just throw myself at something. I don't I don't have a fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
I am plagued with imposter syndrome, but I'm not afraid to fail things because I don't see failures as stopping points. I see
Mm-hmm.
failures of like, well, that went horribly wrong. Let's try something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's actually like one of the tenets of my new marketing strategy,
Mm-hmm.
is experimentation and showing people that I experiment on myself, and that's how it does it. So it's like I want to lead by example in that way. But we got it wrong a lot. We spent a lot of bad money on getting in print advertising and different things like that and trying it
Mm-hmm.
out. So yeah, it was just learning that way, and then reading a ton. I love reading. I love listening to podcasts. I love learning from people who are smarter than me.
Mm-hmm.
My first job out of college, my boss said something that stuck with me. He says, "You really like being the dumbest guy in the room." And I'm like, "Oh, I really do. Like, I love surrounding myself with people who know more about things than I do, because then I learn. If I'm the
Mm.
smartest guy in the room, I'm in the wrong room."
Here's a question that comes up as you say that. I totally agree with you. Like the room that we're in running, they call it having a rabbit.
Hmm.
So I'm always looking for rabbits. But what is the difference between being the dumbest person in the room and having imposter syndrome? Or how does imposter syndrome impact that, what room you put yourself in?
Good
Because
question.
so many people struggle with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I think everybody. I think it is a truly universal experience if you are not a sociopath. But yeah, I think it comes down to how you show up in that room. Like let's say you're the dumbest person in the room because you're at a conference for the first time and you're looking at all of these other photographers and the speakers and everything, and they're just like, oh, they're just so much better than me. They're so much better than me. I'll never get to that place. that's the imposter syndrome speaking. Whereas if you are in the same room and you say, oh, they're so much better than me, I need to learn how to get higher. I need to learn to level up. Like I
Right.
remember going to conferences, and this was already like by the time I was a speaker, and I still went to every single talk. And one of the other speakers is like, aren't you bored? Like you already are successful. And I'm like, no, every single one of these people has at least one thing to tell me that I've never known before, or that will like, I'll hear it in a new way that will transform how I see something. And the next day that speaker was in the chair beside me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's how you got to do it. Like you can't, it's not about putting people on pedestals, it's about accepting their knowledge and accepting their mentorship, because if they're there, they want, people love to share knowledge, people love to lift others up, you just have to be
Mm-hmm.
open to it.
Yeah. And I think imposter syndrome stops us from being open to it, right?
100%. We
Yeah.
feel it's a limit, right? Imposter syndrome is everybody's going to find out I'm bad at this thing and they're going to shame me, and then I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But really what it is, I was talking to a friend about this the other day. Like when we started our photography business, we were terrible. Like I
Oh
can
my
go
God.
back and look at, like, we had like peeking around tree
Oh,
photos and like
I want
all
to give
sorts of
people their money
properties.
back.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like whenever I start something new now, I think about like, 15 years ago, we were so bad at this thing. And then we got better at it. And then people asked us to teach them it and like all the rest of this. And so why won't the same thing be true about whatever I'm starting today?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, and then it is also multiplied though by, so you get to this point where you're feeling like, okay, I'm doing better. I'm not as good as that person. I'll never be as good as that person. And what am I even doing here? But also, I'm scared to try anything for fear of failing. Like there's those
Mm-hmm.
two, like fear of failure is huge in imposter syndrome as well.
Yes.
It's like a main feature.
Yeah.
So how you said you don't fear failure.
Anymore. Like I definitely did. Like I grew up in a family where, if I got 97% on a test, my dad
Mm-hmm.
would ask what happened to the other 3%.
Where's the other three? Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like it didn't even matter if I succeeded, I still failed.
Yeah.
Um, but conversely, outside of school things, he was also a big supporter of just go do it anyways, do it scared, like with sports or with other things. And he let me try a million things. I played 11 instruments as a kid. I played like 9 sports. I had a skateboard for 4 days because I'm like, I want to try this thing out. And then I wasn't good at it. And I stopped, and he would be outside on the skateboard, at, 40 or whatever, showing me that it's okay to suck at things. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was like this duality. And eventually, as I grew up, I learned more. Like you had mentioned in the email leading up to this, to think about times in my life where I had tilts or shifts, and one of them was I was a terminally shy kid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was the person that would like go to a party in high school and sit in the corner of a room and not talk to anybody and be perfectly fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished school. I got my first job. That company got bought out. I got laid off and got a big check. And so I decided I was going to go solo travel Europe, because it was the thing that gave me the most anxiety in the entire world, because I would have no one else to rely on. I had surrounded myself with theater kids because they were
Mm-hmm.
the most outgoing people. So I never had to be like in any situation, if something had to be asked for or somebody had to be confronted, the theater kids would do it. I was fine. I
Yes.
was the lighting guy. I was in the
Yeah,
booth. I
yeah.
didn't have
I'm
to
the
talk to
gaffer.
anybody. Yeah. Yeah. But so like traveling Europe by myself, there was no support. There's no safety net, and it was 3.5 months of learning to engage with people and learning to come out of my shell and learning to ask for things. And I'm still pretty socially awkward. Like if somebody gets my order wrong at a restaurant, I'll just eat it. It's fine. That's not worth the conflict. But I can ask for things now, and I can do all the rest of that. And so I think learning to be bad at things allowed me to learn to fail at things, because failure is iterative. Failure is not an end. Like unless something blows up or you die, it's never a stopping point. Like you
Yeah.
can keep going. And that was a big revelation for me of just like trying things and be willing to get it wrong, because I got
Yeah.
it wrong all the time. And most people don't notice when you get it
Yeah.
wrong.
It's true. And if you allow yourself to get it wrong, you realize that it's, oh, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't, that horrible thing that I was expecting to happen didn't happen.
Oh yeah, our worries about the outcome are always worse than the outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, that's literally why this sign is behind me. There is no tiger. Like, you're not going to, like, most of the things, like, you have a bad work meeting, a tiger's not going to eat you.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's like our fears are there for a reason. It's like a biological reason, but the things that we are afraid of now are a lot less scary than what they were intended for. So,
Indeed.
yeah.
Oh, I just lost my question. Fear of failure, being wrong. Oh, yes. So I was talking with my students yesterday, and we do a module on dreaming,
Mm-hmm.
and it blows people's minds. And I think our inability to dream. So dreaming is creative problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we are creatives. We have to be able to think creatively. But at some point in our lives, we are told that we are not allowed to dream for a myriad of reasons. And I think that really plays into our fear of failure,
Yeah.
right? Because if you don't allow yourself to dream this thing, you're not going to fail at it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with goal setting, right? People don't like to set goals, or there's this big movement of, the SMART goals, the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time sensitive. Um, I think we really pander about with these goals because we are so conditioned not to fail
Yeah.
and not to share our goals, because what if you don't achieve that goal? Then you're a failure. Like all of these things are so wrapped up together. And if we do, like, have you ever noticed or recognized, or do you dream? Like, does dreaming play in any part in Dave Moss's brain to help you um try things and like not worry about failing? Where does that play in your brain?
Oh yeah, I'm a
Do you
chronic
dream?
dreamer. I dream all the time. Like my wife literally calls me Peter Pan because I'm always just like boyish and dreaming and having ideas. Like literally my favorite hobby is adult make believe. Like I play Dungeons and Dragons twice a week in my basement with a group of creative friends and it's amazing. Um when I took my life coaching program, Martha said, if you can't dream it, you can't do it. And
Mm-hmm.
I fully believe in that. Like I dream dreams that are way so big all the time. I dream more projects than I will ever have time to do in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I fall short on way more of my dreams than I ever achieve, but it doesn't stop me from dreaming. Like I, I would not be me if I couldn't dream. It is
Mm-hmm.
so much. Like I will have a conversation with a friend over coffee and like one little thought will spark an idea and I will just run with that until like I have this whole thing fully fleshed out in my mind and I go, cool. And then I just move on to the next thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
I dream stuff all the time. I dream stuff for other people. Like I'll have ideas for my friends and I'm like, this is something that you should do. And they're like, yeah, that sounds really fun. I have no time to do that. I'm like, cool, well, it's yours. You do with it what you will, but
Yeah.
like I'll never do it. I don't have the skills or the ability or whatever or the time to do it. But like I thought this would be cool for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What dreams do you have right now?
Oh boy, a couple of things. So, in true serial entrepreneurial fashion, my wife and I are starting a new business. That'll be our fifth because we're insane people. But we're starting an album design and sales company, and so this is the first dream where we're growing a business that can grow bigger than us. It's the first scalable business, right? Because we can hire other designers, and we can do like it could get to a point where we are just owner operators, or something like that. Um, and like Abby and I dreamed together. Like we were just downstairs before the call, talking about like the clients and the growth. And, if this goes well, this is also a business where we could truly digital nomad, as long as we could bring our dogs with us, because we don't have to be here to photograph weddings or to do anything else like that, and all the rest of it. So that's definitely a dream right now. I have had a long-term dream of hiking the Appalachian Trail someday. We have some house guests right now where she lives at the midpoint of the AT. And so she's like, well, if you ever do it, like we live in the town where you're supposed to eat it's like half gallon of ice cream because you're at the half point of the AT. And so she's like, I'll be there waiting for you with ice cream. And it's like, so I always have those types of dreams in my head. I love reading like biographies and adventure books
Yeah.
because they give me dreams, even if it's something I'll never do. Like, I am never going to be a long distance runner. I can barely run 2 kilometers, but like, I love reading books of people who run like 300-mile races and stuff like that, because I'm just so excited that someone's living their dream. Like, I love that shit.
Yeah, me too. I will never be a mountain climber. And I've had different like forays into it. And I'm like, it's not for me. But those are my favorite books to read.
Yeah.
Books of
Yeah.
people who have like scaled inscalable mountains. And like there's a movie called Meru by Jimmy
Mm-hmm.
Chin, where they
Mm-hmm.
climb that like devil's fingernail sticking out of the middle of the earth. Like that stuff is so wild. But
Yeah.
it's also inspires you to think about like I don't think we like necessarily consciously think this, but I think it provides energy and motivation for the next like it's uplifting in a way that you go about your next activity thinking like
Yeah.
everything's possible,
It's inspiration porn, and I love it because
Yeah.
so many of these things, like I read this book, North by Scott Jurek, where he
Mm.
wanted to break the Appalachian Trail speed record
Yeah.
running it. And so it's like two things. I love long distance running books and I love the AT. So it's like, this is perfect for me. But like, I read those books and it just makes me, there's no point, right? Like, it's literally a line
Yes.
on a website. Like, 99.9% of the world will never know that he did this. There's no
Yeah.
outcome. There's no like sponsorship deal at the end of it or anything else like that. He just does it because he's got the dream and he wants to do it.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that there doesn't have to be outcome, because I think so many people want to, especially in today's day and age with like hustle culture, and thankfully we're slowly coming out of that. But like, we feel like everything has to be productive. Everything has to have a point at the end
Yeah.
of it instead of just doing it. Like,
Yeah.
re-embracing hobbies in my life has been wonderful because there's no, who cares? It's
Yeah.
just, I'm just doing it for the joy of doing it. And I think that's like, for a lot of my clients, that's the gateway back into dreaming, is just dream about something for the joy of it, not because it needs to pay for your mortgage or not because it needs to win you an award. Those dreams are
Mhm.
great, but what's something that you want to do just because you've always wanted to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. The process. And we're
Yeah.
so hard on ourselves about the outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like, even if like, say you dream to run a 10K and you run 7,
Mm.
that's
Failed.
still a win. Yeah, most people will see it as a failure because I didn't
Yeah.
make it all the way, but I'm like, you still ran 7K. That's amazing. They're like, good for you.
Yeah.
It's just a blueprint for the next one. Okay, you ran 7K, and then what happened? Okay, do you still want to run 10K? Yes. Well, you know what happens at that 7K mark now, so figure it out.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Or it's okay that you didn't.
it's great that you didn't. Like, you still
Yeah.
ran more than I could.
Doing that though, that what you just did there, you compared that feat to your own,
But I don't
right?
have I don't have that dream. Like, I've
Yeah.
I've I've tried to run because I read these books about running, and I'm like, maybe I should try it for myself. And I just realized
Barefoot.
it's just not for me. I
Mhm.
like hiking long distances. I like going for, like, I'll put weights on my back and go for a long walk. Running just wasn't my thing. But like, for somebody else, if that's their dream, I will support it until the cows come home. I don't also need to do it. There's a million billion things to do in this world, and I will never do most of them. So I just try
Mhm.
to find the things that I actually want to do that also bring me joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I was pointing out there was that we still have this innate tendency to compare other people's journeys to our own,
Yeah, of course. It's just
right?
relatability. That's just a human thing, I think.
Yeah.
Like we want to reality is perspective and we only have one. So
Yeah.
it's a way of understanding and it's a way of trying to connect. Um I generally try to do it, the Walt Whitman quote, be curious, not judgmental. That's why my
Mhm.
podcast is called So Damn Curious. Like I will always try to do it from an uplifting place as opposed to a
Yeah.
judgmental place,
Yeah.
because judgment shuts people down right away. Like if somebody ran a 7K and they didn't make it all the way, judgment would be like, well, where's the last 3K?
Yeah.
We're
Totally. Thanks, Dad.
yeah. Whereas like, from the other side of it, like I love asking people why is that important to them?
Yeah.
Because if they only made it 7K and I go, why is it really important for you to make it 10?
Hmm.
Usually the 10 was an arbitrary goal that they set for
Yeah.
themselves. Usually there's something underneath that. And then you can show them that they already achieved it. And like watching that light go off in someone's eyes where they're like, oh, this is why it's important. And I did it. And then they're
Hmm.
like, fuck yeah, you just won the race,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, your Tell us about your podcast.
Oh, yeah. It's a new project that came out of my depression. It was a dream. So like I've always loved podcasting. I've always loved interview podcasts in particular. Like it's
Mhm.
probably like half of my day every day I've got headphones in listening to interview podcasts and reading biographies and things like that because I find
Mhm.
people intensely fascinating.
Mhm.
My problem was I had tried and failed 3 times to start a podcast. Interesting statistic. Something like 90% of podcasts stop after 3 episodes. Uh,
Three.
yeah, 3 episodes.
Oh, wow.
And then 20 is the other. The rest, like most of the rest, only 3% of podcasts make it past 20 episodes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's insane. Insane. And so when I heard that, I was thinking about like, oh, yep, I've had 2 podcasts fail before 20 episodes.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I was thinking about it and I couldn't figure out why. And it was because I was putting a way too much pressure on myself about it.
Yeah.
I was trying to niche way too hard. I was trying to like think about target audience and like all of these
Yeah.
business things that I know
All the
about,
business
as
things.
opposed to just like doing it for the joy of doing it. And so in that same psilocybin trip, it came out to just have fun with it. Like, what would it look like if it didn't matter and you could just have fun with it? Like, what's the point of why you want to do it? And it's like, I love having conversations with people because I'm curious about them. And then
Mhm.
that's where this all sort of came from of like, okay, don't worry about marketing it so much and don't worry about like who the target audience is. Just go in it and have fun with it.
Mhm.
And then I listened to a podcast episode with a guy named Rich Roll, and he was saying when he switched his podcast from being about high performing athletes and veganism and all of this to just people who have achieved things,
Mhm.
it stopped feeling like work. And then his podcast blew up. And
Yeah.
so it was like the confirmation bias that I needed, that if I just have fun with it and I could just do it for the reason of doing it. And if I miss an upload week, I missed an upload week. It's not the end of the world
Mhm.
because my life doesn't hinge upon this podcast. This is just for me to do for me. And yeah,
Mhm.
that was the big change.
Beautiful. And so
Yeah.
how is it going?
It's
What
it's
number are you at?
It's amazing. I have 3 out. The fourth is coming tomorrow, so I'm going to break the
Woo!
3 mold. I have 20 recorded, so
Nice.
yeah, so I
Nice.
have enough to put out to make it past the 20 mark. I recorded one yesterday. Tomorrow I record episode 21. Um, yeah, and I'm just doing it and I'm having fun with it, and I'm getting to talk to people that like I otherwise wouldn't. Like tomorrow I'm speaking to he's a photographer, but he's also a lieutenant colonel in the military in the States and a surgeon.
Oh my God.
But it's just going to be such a fun conversation because it's like this is not a person like that I would talk to otherwise. And I get to like every episode is so different because the first question, pretty much the only question, like canned question that I ask is, what have you been curious about lately? And then we
Yeah.
go on tangents. Like I talked to a photographer about therapy for 2 hours. I talked to somebody else about the art of conversation because they went to school for rhetoric. It's been all over the place and it's just so fun.
How do you find them?
People I know has been
Mm.
the start of it, or I ask for recommendations. Like I'll talk to my guests and be like, "Hey, is there somebody that you think might be good for this?" And then I also have a huge spreadsheet of people that I have found interesting throughout my life, celebrities from F-list celebrities all the way up to A-list celebrities. And my goal is when I hit 50 episodes, I'm going to reach out to my first celebrity. Like I want to show that I've got some legs behind it. But then I'm just going to start reaching out to people and just taking the risk and seeing what
Mhm.
happens. But
And why celebrities? Why is that a mile marker for you?
I think it's because there are certain people who I admire. Like I use the word celebrity very loosely. Like one of them is this guy on TikTok, Tim Chiasano, who's got 1 million followers and he works in corporate America, but he does these daily vlogs that I find are beautiful and mindful and talk about life in a way that I don't know anything about because I'm not a VP at a Fortune 100 company in New York City. Like
Mhm.
this is a like probably an F-list celebrity, right? He's a TikTok influencer, but he also is a VP at a company. To me, that's like I just want to talk to him. But there's like I find when people have a certain level of notoriety, there are gatekeepers, right? Like I can't email him
Mm.
directly. I have to email
Yeah.
his PR company. And
Yeah.
so that's why it's like I want to have some legs behind this to show that I'm serious about it. This is not a flash in the pan sort of thing. But
Hmm.
then like I also have people on that list like Gabor Mate, who
Hmm.
does podcasts all the time, but like I'm a pretty small fish in a big pond right now. And so I'll take the risk. Like I'm not afraid of reaching out to him, but I want to
Hmm.
hedge my bets that it's a better opportunity that I could have them on.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Talk about the importance of not being invested in the outcome.
Oh, it's funny that I just mentioned Tim Chiasano because his whole thing is get addicted to the outcome, and my whole thing is don't get invested in the outcome.
Yeah, totally.
Um, I saw a photographer speak at the very, very first photography conference I ever went to, a guy named Erwin Darmali. And he said something where he said, no expectations. So he was
Mhm.
talking about this workshop called Foundation Workshops, and it's very hard, and you don't get to control a lot of that whole thing. And so his mantra through that whole thing was no expectations. And it has
Mhm.
become my mantra since
Mhm.
then, where it's like, do it without an expectation of the outcome and the freedom that has
Oh,
given
God, the
me.
freedom.
Yeah. So I
It's
like
incredible.
it's incredible. Like there are certain things where I have to care about the outcome. Like when I'm working with a coaching client or a photography client or something like that, and I'm doing work for other people, I have standards, I would say, not expectations, but standards of like, I need to work this hard or do this much because they're investing in me and so there needs to be a return. But if I'm just doing something for me,
Mhm.
if I don't get addicted to the outcome, then I can change it at any point in time so that I can keep doing it. Like with the podcast, like I'm like, okay, I'm going to do weekly releases and I'm blah, blah, blah. And then I got sick one week and I couldn't edit an episode and I got behind and I was just like, oh, well, I'll just release one next week. And nobody cared. Like nobody knocked
Yeah.
on my door being like, where's the episode this week or anything else like that. So I'm like, okay, like if I got too tied to the outcome, I probably would have pushed myself to edit an episode while I was super sick and then put it out and
Mm.
then been even worse off for it
Yeah.
instead of just being like, well, it's fine. People will survive without my podcast for a week. It'll be out.
And better yet, you will survive even more.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I try to make decisions from a place of am I going to survive or do I want to thrive? And
Yeah.
thrive decisions is as much, it's more saying no than saying yes.
Hmm.
And I was a chronic people pleaser for most of my life. I was really good at saying yes and not good at saying no. And learning to say no was a whole journey. But
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, it's very freeing.
Tell us more about that, the difference between surviving and thriving.
So surviving is doing what you have to do just to get by, right?
Hmm.
Like a lot of last year was survival for me because every day was hard and every day was a struggle and getting on to work calls or getting on going and doing a wedding or whatever, getting to that was survival. And then when I was in it, okay, I'm like, now I'm here, I've pushed the energy, I've got to this point, now I want to thrive in this. So it's like compartmentalizing my energy so that when I'm doing something that I love, because like with coaching, if we didn't live in a capitalist hellscape, I would coach for free. I would mentor for free. I love helping other people solve their
Yeah,
problems.
totally.
And so it's a thrive place for me, but it takes energy. And so
Mhm.
survival is the most sapping energy thing that you can possibly do, right? Like if you think about it from like a hunter gatherer perspective or whatever, like so much of your energy went into just getting enough food and shelter and whatever to make it to the next morning. That's
Mhm.
survival.
Mhm.
Thriving is you don't have to worry about the base stuff. You can just be in the moment. You can be in the flow. Like flow state is a thrive thing. That's not a
Mhm.
survive thing. And so it's like this is all still very like new to me, this concept of it. But
Mhm.
from a like I talked about people hating marketing earlier. Donald Miller and the Story brand, their methodology is how do you help your clients thrive, not just survive. That's where the terminology originally entered my lexicon.
Mhm.
And it made me think about that of like, I don't I don't want someone to come to me for business coaching, for example, and just survive when they're done with me. That's not good enough. Like I want them to finish this and be so up that now they can thrive in their life. Doesn't always hit the mark, but that's my aim, right? Like that's where I'm
Mhm.
going for. But I wasn't doing that for me.
Right.
I was always in survival. I was always in like, I'm just doing the best I fucking can. And it's
Mhm.
exhausting and everything else like that. But then when you start thinking about thrive, you start stripping away the stuff you no longer need that take time and take energy and just sap you. I don't
Mhm.
know if that was an answer. That was kind of rambly, but
No, no, I think it's incredible that the things that we want to help others with and coach them on are the very things that we struggle with.
oh, 100%. Yeah.
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 In my coaching program, they called it original medicine, where
Yeah.
everybody has this thing that they've been to hell and back. And now that's the thing that they can help people with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think it's so incredible. And um, I think we often look to people who um, are savants in their
Mm-hmm.
fields. And some of my most disappointing coaching experiences have been me going to savants and like hoping that they would be able to show me what was up for me or like my next step,
Yeah.
and they weren't able to do that because it was something that came naturally to them.
Yeah.
They may have been able to help me with something else, but that's not what I was going to them for. um so I think that's really important for people who are thinking about like, how do I thrive, is looking for people who are thriving but who are willing to, like, getting back to the sharing thing, transparent enough with you that there have been times when they indeed were not thriving, and that's
Yeah.
actually what we're going to talk about, right? Because I think we strive for, just like in the same way that we go to conferences and we look for the people who have beautiful presets and no lighting, but they're not willing to walk into the room where we're talking about profit and loss reports and and pricing breakdowns. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just, yeah. I think you and I are very similar in that way that like we've learned our lessons, we've taken our knocks, and now we want to learn from people who are transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild.
Well, do you want to talk about mushrooms?
Sure. We can talk about mushrooms.
Do you know that my first email was mushrooms@hotmail.com?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's a great email.
A little tidbit of knowledge about Bobby. It's funny that okay, so are you doing like trips or are you doing microdosing?
Trips. Yeah.
Okay.
Like full like 3 to 5 gram heroic dose, like
Oh, wow.
deep in the shit trips. Yeah.
Is that like clinical or is this experimental?
Uh, I would say experimental, but done very specifically.
Mhm.
So I was a square most of my life, Bobby.
What?
I hadn't smoked drugs or done
Engineer.
anything. Yeah, I know. Go figure. And then I met my wife, who is the exact opposite,
Yeah.
and is very experiential and everything. And so, like my first forays into psychedelics were definitely like as party drugs.
Yeah.
But then as I went on and I learned more about them, because I hate not knowing things, and so I did more
Mm-hmm.
research, I learned more about like psychedelic assisted therapy and stuff. And then when I went and did ayahuasca in Colombia, I learned so much about intention, set, and setting, about how you can use a plant medicine to get an outcome, not necessarily the desired outcome, because plant medicines definitely give you what you need, not what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now if I were to do a trip, which is usually maybe twice a year, like this is not something that is like addictive. It is a full ego death reset when you take that much mushrooms. But I
Mm-hmm.
go in with an intention. So like a week before, I'll start journaling about it. I'll start thinking about it. I'll start like having like, this is what I hope to get out of it, or at least drive me in that direction. Um, then like I always I do it at home. Abby's always here, sober. And then I just literally like I'll drink a fruit smoothie with 3 grams of mushrooms in them, and then I go and lie in our bed and I put music on, and then I just rock it off to space and go wherever I go. And it's often hard. It's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes very, very beautiful. But I always feel so much better and so much more inspired, and I dream bigger and everything after I do that. It used to be how I treated my depression. If I ever got into a really depressive state, I would take mushrooms and I would be fine for 3 months or 6 months or
Oh,
9 months.
interesting.
And that's proven now. Like they're using psilocybin
Right.
therapy for PTSD and for treatment resistant depression, where they say three doses of psilocybin can, if not cure, severely counteract treatment resistant depression. And so that's what that was how I started to use it. Now it's, if I feel adrift,
Mm-hmm.
if I feel stuck, if I feel whatever, and I can't find an outcome,
Mm-hmm.
either through my therapist or a friend or talking to my wife or a book or whatever, that's when I'm like, okay, I know what I got to do. And then
Yeah.
I take a big bunch of mushrooms and usually figure it out.
Yeah. Um, so when you so they just to be clear,
Mhm.
there's all types of different plant medicines, right? But
Mhm.
you're specifically talking about like a strain of mushroom because and there's a bunch of different strains of mushrooms as well.
Yes. Yeah. Psilocybe cubensis is what I take, or magic mushrooms, as most people know them. The specific strain that I take has, of course, a ridiculously stupid name. It is albino penis envy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have some of those in my drawer.
Yeah. Yeah. They just are great for me, and what happens, I enjoy the feeling of it and the outcome of it, so that's what I take. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've done wachuma, I've done ayahuasca, I've done LSD, all of these things. I've tried a bunch of different stuff, and I keep going back to mushrooms.
So that one.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah.
There is so much that nature has to teach us.
Oh God, yes. Yeah, yeah.
I wish we weren't so separated from it.
I think we're getting less. I think certain subsects of society are getting more connected to it again.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be interesting to see what happens over the next 20 years, because I think there is a dislike of where society and technology is going. Like we're seeing it with the AI stuff. AI can be great, but it's also going to destabilize so much stuff. Nobody expected it to come for the creative industry first. We thought it was going to
Yeah.
go for spreadsheets and bankers
Yeah.
and stuff like
No.
that. But yeah, I think, there's a statistic that says like more and more people are moving to small towns. Young people are moving to small towns and intentional communities than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to see more of that. I'm a big believer in there's a type of sci-fi called solar punk, which I love. It's basically like, if everything went well, and technology supports us living in harmony with nature, and people live in tight knit communities, and it's no longer subsistence living, it's post scarcity. So like all of your needs are met, but
Mm-hmm.
we as people just get back to like gardening and connection and community and things like that. Because if we have no need for everything and technology and robots are handling all of the work,
Mm-hmm.
what would we do? We would create art, and we
Oh,
would connect, and
wow.
we would be beautiful. Yeah.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
What is this genre?
Called solar punk.
Solar punk.
Yeah, if anybody wants to read two
Oh
great
my
books about
God.
it, there's an author, Becky Chambers, and she wrote this duology called the Monk and Robot duology. It
Uh-huh.
is it is my coziest, most beautiful, amazing read ever. It's like this philosophy adventure book series, and it's wonderful. And they're easy. They're like 150, maybe 200 pages each, and they're easy reads. And I love them.
Yeah, and
That's my
people,
hope for the future.
yeah, like people aren't getting oppressed and taken advantage of. And
Yeah.
does that happen in solar punk?
No,
That not
that's
exist.
the whole thing, is that's
Awesome.
gone because you don't need it anymore. Like you don't need to steal something from somebody because everything is there and provided. And so it allows for, like, you could live your life and be a cobbler and just make shoes for people, not because they can't get shoes, but because you just really like shoes and all of your
Uh,
materials are provided for you and everything else. It's post scarcity. There's no need for anything.
that's
So
the
then you can
thing.
just do whatever you want.
Do that because you like it, not
Mm-hmm.
because you have to buy milk.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. That
Mm-hmm.
alone blows people's minds. People don't even think that
Yeah.
because it's so ingrained in us, not like it has to be taken from something else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Star Trek is built on all of this, right? Like Star Trek was this post scarcity society where all of your needs are met. And you could just be a bartender if you want to be a bartender, but like nobody has to come in and buy a drink. They just come in and you make a drink for them because there's no money anymore. And the thing that you love to do is to connect with people and make fancy cocktails. And so that's your life. Or you could go and explore and you can get on a spaceship and go do whatever. Now, other societies maybe still have war, which is why there's conflict in Star Trek. But like the whole concept behind it is, if all of our needs were met, what would we do as a society? That's
Huh.
thrive. That's thrive versus survive, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're thriving and everything is met, what would you do with your time? Like I
Yeah.
love that. I love
Oh, I
it.
love this question. I think that's what we're going to close on.
Yeah.
Say it again, Dave.
If all of your needs were met, what would you do with your life?
Boom. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that, my friends, was the wonderful Dave Moss. We didn't talk a lot about photography today because life is much bigger than photography. And I hope that is a message that you were able to pull from that. I think we get really caught up in our to-do lists, and we can, which is the survive mindset, right? And so if we want to thrive, then I think we need to allow ourselves to dream. I think dreaming is a gateway to thriving. And if you are finding challenges in allowing yourself to dream, let me know. It's also something that I have struggled greatly with, and I feel like I'm on the other side of it. So if you want to talk about it, you can reach out to me on Instagram. You can email me through my website. My link is in the show notes. And if you are curious to work with Dave or to learn more from Dave, I will link to his podcast and to his coaching website in the show notes. You have people who have your best interests at heart, and they have ways to help you, and they're willing to share if you are also willing to share. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you for being here. If you feel so inclined, I would love if you could leave a review at the bottom of the notes in the show website. Reviews are how other people find us, and that's sharing too. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to talking with you in our next episode. Have a beautiful day.